Hello and welcome to another of our MMU Q-Step video tutorials. Today we're going to be looking at hypotheses and seeing if they're easier to understand than they are to pronounce. So hypotheses are statements which are predictions of what you expect the outcome of your study to be. It's really important when you're coming up with your hypotheses to make sure they're specific and testable. One way of making sure they're testable is including your independent variable and your dependent variable in your hypotheses. Hypotheses are like socks in that they always come in pairs. You have your research hypothesis, which is the relationship you expect to find between your two variables, and then you have the null hypothesis, which essentially states there'll be no relationship between your two variables. You can think of the null hypothesis as negative Norman, that voice inside your head that always tells you you can't do things and tries to ruin your fun. You might wake up in the morning feeling great and say to yourself, I'm going to seize the day, I'm going to get my dream job. And then negative Norman, the null hypothesis, will come in and you'll think, I'm not going to seize the day, I'm not going to get my dream job. So the null hypothesis always says no to the research hypothesis. So if your research hypothesis is that there is a relationship between age and social media usage, your null hypothesis will say there is not a relationship between age and social media usage. So why do we need the null hypothesis? Well, it's because of a slightly complicated theory called falsification, which states that you can never actually prove anything, and instead should seek to disprove the opposite claim. So instead of testing our research hypothesis, we attempt to disprove our null hypothesis. So if you're like me, you might have some friends who like to make fairly outlandish claims, like, I make the best cake in the whole of Manchester. Now, proving this claim is actually really hard, almost impossible. You'd have to get everyone in the city to bake a cake and then do a taste test. However, it's far easier to disprove this claim. If you went to a cake shop in Manchester and tried a cake that was better than your friend's, that would disprove the theory. So when we're testing our hypotheses in statistics, we actually begin by assuming the null hypothesis is correct, and then seeing if we can provide enough evidence against it to reject it. This works in much the same way that a court case works, where we begin by assuming the suspect's innocence. In a normal court case, we would begin by presuming this bank robber's innocence before we then heard evidence or data. We might watch CCTV footage of a very similar man running out of the bank. We might even find the getaway car and some of the money with the fingerprints of the suspect all over them. The suspect might even show up to court in his bank robber outfit. Once there is enough evidence or data like this to suggest beyond reasonable doubt that the suspect isn't innocent, we reject the suspect's innocence and instead accept that they're guilty. So you can think of hypothesis testing in the same way. If we wanted to know if there's a relationship between income and happiness, we'd first start by assuming that the null hypothesis, that there isn't a relationship, is true first, and then we'd look at the data to see if we can reject this claim. So imagine we look at the data and we find that in general, the higher your income, the happier you are. We could see this very much as evidence against the null hypothesis that there is no relationship. We'd then look at the p-value to see how strong this evidence was. If the p-value was below 0.05, then we would reject the null hypothesis and accept the alternative hypothesis that there is a relationship between income and happiness. If our p-value was above 0.05 and therefore not statistically significant, then that would suggest there wasn't strong enough evidence against our null hypothesis that there wasn't a relationship between income and happiness. And so we would say that we failed to reject the null hypothesis. So thanks for watching another of our MMU Q-Step video tutorials. And I hypothesize that you'll all be hypothesis masters before you know it.